A live call from an African military leader. A tearful breakdown on American television. And a moment the world couldn't ignore. What started as a simple morning interview turned into one of the most emotional live broadcasts in modern history. No one expected the segment to go off script. No one expected a sitting head of state, known for challenging global superpowers, to appear unannounced. And certainly no one expected a Hollywood actor to cry on air. Not from shame, not from scandal, but from something far more profound. This was more than news. It was a collision of truth, courage, and history. To most people, Terence Howard is just another actor, charismatic, intelligent, and maybe a little eccentric. His filmography spans decades, with performances that made headlines and earned awards. But what the world rarely sees is the version of Terence that exists off-camera. The thinker, the engineer, the silent contributor to causes far beyond entertainment. Beneath the Hollywood persona lies a man obsessed with codes, symmetry, and systems. Not just mathematical ones, societal ones. He's long believed that the systems guiding global power are broken, and that the solutions might lie far from the places we usually look. While most celebrities pour their influence into causes that feel safe, Terence walked a different path, one less broadcast, more intentional. Years ago, he quietly launched a foundation known as the One Frequency Initiative. On the surface, it sounded like another philanthropic venture. But in practice, it was a radical departure from the norm. Instead of handing out temporary relief, Terence focused on long-term empowerment, funding solar-powered innovation labs, mobile engineering classrooms, and tech-based education programs in rural regions of Ghana, Burkina Faso, and Sierra Leone. His focus wasn't charity. It was sovereignty. When asked privately why he didn't publicize these efforts more, his answer was simple and pointed. This isn't charity, this is restitution. To him, Africa wasn't a place in need of saving. It was the epicenter of future global innovation, a sleeping giant held back by outdated narratives and foreign interference. And he wanted to be part of reshaping that future, not as a savior but as a partner. It was through this quiet work that he began forming relationships with African leaders who shared his vision. Men who, like him, believed in dismantling the systems that served the few while silencing the many. One of those leaders was Ibrahim Traoré, the young, unflinching voice of a new Africa. Their conversations were off the record, their plans unpublicized. But the respect between them was undeniable. Two men, from vastly different worlds, connected by a common desire to see the global story rewritten from the ground up. To understand the weight of that unexpected live call, you first need to understand the man behind it, Ibrahim Traoré, a name that has become both revered and controversial on the world stage. At just 36 years old, Traoré rose to power in Burkina Faso through a swift and unapologetic transition. But unlike many who came before him, he didn't try to blend into the global political machine. He challenged it. With piercing rhetoric and bold policy shifts, he quickly became a symbol of Africa's new era of self-determination. For decades, Burkina Faso had been viewed by the international community as a small, mineral-rich state dependent on external aid and military support. But Traoré's ascent marked a sharp departure from that narrative. He demanded full control over the country's natural resources, expelled foreign military bases, and called out what he labeled as disguised occupation by global institutions. To Western governments he became a growing concern, unpredictable, unfiltered, and unwilling to play by the script. Media outlets across Europe and North America began labeling him as extreme. Headlines used words like populist, anti-establishment, and radical. But to millions across the African continent, and especially within its youth, he became a hero. His speeches electrified a generation tired of being spoken for. He didn't just talk about independence, he acted on it. And that courage resonated deeply with members of the African diaspora in Brazil, the UK, the Caribbean, and especially the United States. Social media platforms flooded with edited clips of his declarations, set to music, embraced like rallying cries for a global movement. He wasn't just the president of Burkina Faso. He was the face of a wider awakening, one that demanded respect, ownership, and narrative control. Comment below. Do you think Africa should cut ties with former colonial powers? Or do you believe global partnerships are still necessary? It was meant to be a routine media appearance. The producers of Global Perspectives were thrilled to have Terence Howard on the lineup. His name alone guaranteed viewership, and his reputation for thoughtful, unfiltered commentary promised a segment that would trend well beyond its air date. Cameras were checked. The lighting was perfect. The control room buzzed with quiet anticipation. When Terence entered the studio, he carried himself with his usual quiet confidence. He wore a charcoal blazer lined with a striking band of Kent cloth, a subtle nod that wouldn't go unnoticed by those familiar with its cultural weight. He greeted the crew warmly, took his seat, and waited for the countdown to begin. The show's host, Chloe Rivers, was known for her charisma and her ability to guide even the most controversial interviews with grace. She opened the segment with familiar territory, acting, recent appearances, and creative inspiration. The atmosphere was easygoing. The live audience responded with polite laughter and light applause. Then came the shift. Chloe leaned in, her tone turning slightly more thoughtful. "You've been investing in some unexpected places lately," she said. "Tell us why West Africa has become so important to you." Terence didn't blink. He looked directly into the camera. "We talk about change here," he said slowly. "But real transformation is happening over there." He explained, carefully without theatrics, that he wasn't interested in headlines or spotlight. That his investments in education, innovation, and youth empowerment weren't about image, but about principle. About alignment. About responsibility. What the audience didn't know was that this answer, sincere and grounded, was only the beginning of what would become one of the most unforgettable moments in broadcast history. The plan had been to close the segment with a surprise message. A short thank you video from a school in Ghana that had recently received equipment through Terence's foundation. It was meant to be a light, feel-good moment to wrap up an already compelling interview. But then, something shifted. As Chloe introduced the video, the studio monitors flickered. A faint distortion cut across the screen. At first it looked like a technical glitch, maybe a connection issue. Producers behind the glass exchanged confused glances. The host tried to recover with a light joke. Then the feed stabilized. And there he was. Seated at a modest desk, dressed in olive military attire, sat Ibrahim Traoré, live, direct, and unmistakable. The air in the studio froze. Chloe blinked, speechless. The control room fell silent. Terence's posture changed instantly, not out of shock but disbelief. His hands tightened on the armrest. His eyes locked onto the screen. "Brother Terence," Traoré began, his voice steady and clear, "I hope you will forgive this intrusion. But I insisted on speaking to you directly." No one moved. "I came not to congratulate you for money, but to acknowledge your courage. In a world full of silence and fear, you have spoken with honesty. You have defended the dignity of Africa without asking for recognition. You chose justice. And we see you." Terence leaned forward. His lips parted, but no words came. "We do not need saviors," Traoré continued. "We need allies. And you have been one. May history remember that." The screen went black. And that's when it happened. Terence's head dropped. His voice, barely audible, cracked under the weight of emotion. "I've waited all my life to hear words like that." The tears came raw, real, and unfiltered. The audience didn't know how to react. Seconds passed in heavy silence. Then a single clap. Then more. Then an eruption of applause unlike anything that studio had ever witnessed. Was this a powerful moment of unity or a political stunt? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. As the clip circulated online, the digital atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Within hours, #TerrenceHoward surged to the top of trending lists on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Snippets of his speech flooded timelines, raw, impassioned, and deeply polarizing. Users around the globe reposted, dissected, and remixed his words, turning them into rallying cries or points of contention. On mainstream platforms, anchors and analysts treaded carefully. Some praised the courage it took to speak so candidly on such a charged stage, while others questioned the timing and implications of his message. Panels lit up with debate, some calling it a necessary wake-up call, others branding it reckless. Within the African American community, the response was layered but largely supportive. Cultural figures and grassroots organizers saw his stance as a reclamation of voice. Pan-African collectives across the U.S., Ghana, South Africa, and the UK reposted the video with captions of solidarity, many dubbing him a modern-day griot. His message resonated with those calling for self-reliance, unity, and truth-telling beyond traditional narratives. On the political front, Reactions were swift but strategic. A few lawmakers acknowledged the speech without directly endorsing its claims, while foreign policy experts debated the international consequences. Howard's words had reached far beyond a single event. They cracked open wider conversations about representation, accountability, and the power of the global diaspora. Meanwhile, think pieces poured in. University panels scheduled emergency forums. Podcasts aired special episodes. Even late-night hosts, usually detached from these subjects, chimed in, some seriously, others through satire. Whether admired or scrutinized, Terence Howard had ignited a moment. One that refused to be ignored. What many assumed was a carefully orchestrated gesture began in silence. On a couch in Ouagadougou, long after midnight. Hours before the summit, Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat alone, watching a grainy video from nearly a decade ago. Terence Howard at a lesser-known university forum, calmly unpacking ideas most actors avoid. No applause. No headlines. Just clarity. That moment struck Traoré. By morning, his team was caught off guard. The invitation to Howard had bypassed protocol. No cultural attaches. No media consultants. No polling. This wasn't about optics. According to one aide, Traoré's words were simple. His quiet courage deserved a loud thank you. Insiders say the call was direct. No intermediary. Traoré reached out personally, voice steady, intent clear. He wasn't looking for a speech. He wanted a presence. A man who had spoken truthfully when it wasn't fashionable, who had questioned dominant frameworks before it became trendy. The move wasn't without resistance. Some advisors warned of backlash, concerned about potential fallout from international partners. But Traoré didn't flinch. To him, Howard wasn't a celebrity, he was a thinker, someone unafraid to challenge. This wasn't about elevating Burkina Faso's profile. It was about aligning with those who shared a deeper vision, one not shaped by polls but by purpose. By the time the cameras rolled, one thing was clear. What looked spontaneous was deeply intentional. What began as a bold appearance transformed into something deeper. A pulse felt across continents. Conversations erupted not just online, but in classrooms, roundtables, and private living rooms. From Lagos to Los Angeles, public figures began weighing in, not for clout but for clarity. Artists spoke of reclaiming narrative. Scholars highlighted the significance of perspective. Howard's words had cracked something open, a collective readiness to reimagine identity, history, and connection beyond borders. In the days that followed, Terence quietly began laying groundwork for a documentary tour across West Africa. Not with red carpets but with real people. Villages, universities, archives. He wanted to listen as much as speak, to document lives and legacies overlooked by traditional lenses. For the public, the shift was undeniable. No longer just a face on a screen, Howard was now seen as a thread, binding cultures, histories, and truths often scattered. His presence felt less like performance, more like purpose. In interviews he remained measured, humble even. When asked how it felt to become a symbol of something larger, he paused before offering only this. Sometimes the truth deserves tears. And in that moment, the weight of what had happened, and what might come next, settled in. This wasn't the end of a story. It was the start of a larger remembering. A reminder that courage, when spoken softly, can echo loudly across oceans.